Title: The Things We Bury. A Quiet Ruin. The suburban cul-de-sac was lined with identical boxy homes, trimmed lawns, and the illusion of safety. Rachel Morgan stood in her kitchen, barefoot on the cold tile floor, her fingers gripping the edge of the marble countertop as the sun sank below the horizon. The dishwasher hummed behind her. Dinner sat untouched on the stove, slowly congealing. Mark should have been home by now. Her phone buzzed. Another delay. Emergency deposition, be home late, don't wait up. 3 nights in a row, her gaze drifted to the envelope she had found tucked into the pocket of Mark's gym bag that morning. A receipt, not from any court building or cafe near his law office, but from The Haven, a boutique hotel downtown. The timestamp read 3:46 p.m. last Thursday. A single night stay. Room 311. She had always prided herself on not being the suspicious type. But now her hands shook as the question screamed through her skull. Lies, half-truths, cold silences, all buried under the surface of their 10-year marriage. The mask of routine. Mark Morgan left the parking garage in silence, his face washed in the blue glow of his phone as he reread the text from Rachel. "We need to talk. Tonight." He knew that tone. Polite punctuation, no emojis. A loaded phrase, pretending to be civil. For weeks, he'd felt it fraying, the tightrope they both walked between pretense and collapse. But the truth wasn't simple. There was her. Yes. A woman named Lila, a fellow attorney at his firm. But it hadn't started in lust. It had started in exhaustion, in silence, in the growing canyon between him and Rachel after their second miscarriage, when grief made them strangers sleeping back to back. He had tried to talk, she had shut down, and maybe he had too in his own way. Still, he hadn't stopped being a husband. He hadn't wanted to stop. He just didn't know how to come back. An empty house is a mirror. That evening, they sat at opposite ends of the couch, wine glasses untouched. A candle flickered between them, its glow catching the edges of their tired faces. "I found the receipt," Rachel said quietly, without venom. Mark didn't pretend to misunderstand. "I know." She nodded, swallowing hard. "How long?" 3 months. The silence returned, heavy, awkward, raw. She could see how exhausted he was, but her sympathy only twisted the knife deeper. She wanted to scream, throw something. Instead, she asked, "Why?" His response was quiet. "Because I didn't know how to reach you anymore. Because we weren't us. And I didn't want to feel alone in my own marriage." Tears welled in her eyes. "So you decided to cheat?" "I decided to feel something. That's not an excuse. I'm just telling you the truth." What we choose to hear. Rachel sat in the parking lot of the hotel a week later, room 311. Her PI had confirmed it wasn't just once. He had photos, dates, a timeline she could now recite like scripture. She didn't go inside. Instead, she lit a cigarette, a habit she'd quit years ago, and watched the entrance. A woman exited, tall, blonde. Lila. Rachel studied her face, searching for malice, for shame. But Lila only looked human, preoccupied, maybe guilty, maybe not. At home, Mark was trying. He had canceled the affair, quit his job, started therapy. But something in Rachel refused to thaw. She couldn't decide what she hated more, the betrayal or the fact that part of her still wanted to forgive him. The weight of secrets. A new twist surfaced days later. Rachel's friend, Danny, a local journalist, uncovered something strange. Lila was being investigated in a corporate whistleblower case, and Mark had been her legal counsel before their affair. Suddenly, Rachel wasn't sure what had driven Mark into Lila's arms. Was it really grief and loneliness, or had he compromised? Everything for power? She confronted him. You knew she was under investigation when you slept with her, Rachel accused. Mark looked stunned. I didn't. Not until after it ended. Did you help her cover it up? No. But you're not sure, are you? She whispered. You don't know what you were protecting. He didn't answer. A marriage on trial as. The case against Lila unfolded publicly. Mark was subpoenaed. Rachel watched him squirm under pressure, saw the man she loved become something smaller, shakier. She wasn't sure if he was guilty of a crime, but he had already betrayed her trust. They separated. The house fell quiet. Rachel went back to painting, something she had abandoned years ago. She poured everything into canvases that spoke louder than her voice ever could. And still, she thought about him. About the nights before the silence, about the man who used to bring her coffee with a kiss. Mark, for his part, fought the temptation to plead his way back. He let her go, not out of indifference, but in a rare moment of respect. He didn't know if they had a future, but he hoped. What remains a year passed. The Lila case ended with fines but no jail time. Mark was cleared, but his reputation had dimmed. He took a job at a legal aid clinic, a quieter life. Rachel hosted her first solo art show downtown. One of the paintings, a stark, abstract piece called Fault Lines, caught his eye immediately. After the show, he waited outside. She stepped into the streetlight, older now, sadder, stronger. They didn't embrace, they didn't cry, just a long look. Then Rachel said, I still don't know what I want. And Mark replied, That's okay. I'll wait until you do, or I won't, but I'll be here. If you ever want to talk. She nodded, quietly, and walked into the night alone. Ending note. They had both broken something that could never be fully mended. But in the ruins, they had begun separately to grow again. Whether the future held forgiveness, friendship, or final distance, they didn't know. Some things they had learned can only be rebuilt one word at a time, if at all. 8. In the space between. 3 months later, spring crept into the city with shy sunrises and soft rains. Rachel had moved into a modest studio apartment above a florist's shop in Midtown. The walls smelled like eucalyptus and soil. Her landlord, a widower named Helen, brought her coffee most mornings and never asked too many questions. Rachel liked it that way. She painted often, too much, if she was honest. It became less therapy and more compulsion, a way to outrun thoughts that still circled her like carrion birds. Some nights she would wake in a sweat, hearing Mark's voice in her dreams, not pleading, not apologizing, but asking, why won't? You let this go? She didn't have an answer. Maybe because letting go would mean forgiving herself, too. She hadn't told him about the appointment, about the weeks leading up to it, the quiet panic, the delayed periods, the test that came back, faint but real. She hadn't told anyone about the abortion. It wasn't his business, not anymore. But the secret sat inside her like a stone. Lines across the table Mark's life had become humbler, more structured. The legal aid clinic had none of the sleek polish of his old firm. It was overworked, underfunded, and the most honest thing he'd done in years. He saw people desperate to hold their families together, to protect what little they had. Sometimes he thought about telling Rachel, about how it changed him, but that felt like a trick, a plea for redemption. She didn't owe him that. They met once every few weeks, usually by accident, a gallery opening, a mutual friend's dinner party. The conversations were civil, almost easy, like the ghosts of who they used to be had made peace before they had. But one rainy afternoon, she asked him to meet at a cafe. He arrived early. She was already there. Rachel looked pale but resolved. There's something I should tell you, she said. Mark waited. I was pregnant, just before we separated. He blinked. You... I didn't keep it. I couldn't. He felt the air leave his lungs. Was it mine? She nodded. They sat in silence as thunder rolled outside. I'm not telling you because I want anything from you, she said quietly. I hated the idea of burying another truth. He reached for his coffee, hands trembling. Thank you for telling me? I didn't forgive you because I didn't know how to forgive myself, she added. And I still don't. But maybe now we're even. He didn't know what to say. The grief was layered, tangled, complicated beyond words. Still, in her eyes, he saw something he hadn't in a long time. Not love, but recognition. Crossroads in. The months that followed, they slowly, cautiously, began to talk again. Not as lovers, not as the people they once were, but as survivors of a shared storm. Some evenings, Rachel would stop by the clinic with coffee. Other days, Mark would visit her studio, offering quiet praise for her newest work. They asked nothing of each other. They just were. And sometimes that was enough, their friends whispered. Are you getting back together? Rachel never answered directly. Once Mark asked her, if we started over, do you think it would work? She looked at him for a long moment. I think we're too honest now for it to ever be easy, she said. But maybe that's the point. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. What forgiveness isn't. Late one summer night, they walked through the city, past the old neighborhood, past the house they used to share. New owners had painted the shutters a cheerful yellow. Wind chimes jingled on the porch. Mark reached out and gently took her hand. She didn't pull away. Do you ever miss it? He asked. Every day, she whispered. But I also know we can't live in a memory. Do you hate me? She hesitated. I did, but hate rots everything it touches. Do you forgive? Me! I'm working on forgiving myself first. Maybe that's the same thing. 12. Open ends in the final weeks of summer. Mark received an offer to join a legal aid nonprofit in another city, smaller, quieter. He told Rachel about it over lunch, not as a farewell, but as a question. She looked at him, then at her own hands. The silence stretched. I think you should go, she said gently. You're doing good work. And maybe it's time we both start new stories, not just rewrite the old one. He nodded. He knew she was right. They hugged before he left, not tightly, not with regret, just with understanding. Epilogue. A year later, Rachel's art was gaining attention. Subtle, abstract. Pieces that spoke to ache, to resilience, to things unspoken. She smiled more now. Not always, but often enough. Mark wrote her sometimes. Short emails. No pressure. She answered sometimes. They were not lovers, not enemies, not quite friends, but they had weathered something together that neither fully understood, and perhaps in that quiet, bittersweet space between what had been and what might never be again, there was peace, or something close enough to it. The autumn came with orange leaves and cold winds. Rachel stood before a blank canvas, paintbrush idle in her hand. A knock on the studio door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Alan. She hadn't seen him since that night. The confrontation, the unraveling. He looked older, thinner, the confidence drained from his frame. I know I shouldn't be here, he said, but I needed to say something. About that night. About the blackmail. Rachel stared at him, stunned. I found out Mark was investigating. Something in the firm, Alan continued. It wasn't just about your affair. He was getting close to uncovering a client laundering money through our real estate wing. I panicked. I thought if I distracted him... You used me, Rachel said, voice low. He nodded, eyes dropping. Yes, I did, and I'm sorry. I didn't think it would destroy you both. I just didn't want to lose everything. The confession hit like cold water. Rachel took a step back. So the affair wasn't even about love? Alan laughed bitterly. I thought it was, but it was just cowardice. She didn't ask him to stay. He didn't ask for forgiveness. As he turned to go, she called after him. Did Mark know? Alan paused. He suspected, but he never retaliated. He just walked away. Fine. Letters and loose ends. Later that night, Rachel found an old box of letters and notebooks. One of them had a note from Mark, something he'd written in the weeks after their separation but never sent. You said once that we weren't built to survive betrayal, but maybe we're built to endure the truth, even when it cuts deeper than lies. I still see you in everything. I don't know if that's a blessing or a wound. She read it twice, then 3 times. Outside, the rain began again, soft against the windows like a memory trying to return. She closed the notebook, put it back in the box, and sat by the window. And the choice. A few weeks later, Mark returned to town, just for a legal conference, he said. They met for coffee, the easy rhythm between them still intact, but now touched with something softer. Older. I heard Alan came by, Mark said quietly. Rachel nodded. He told me everything, about the blackmail, the cover-up. Mark looked down at his hands. I never wanted you to find out that way. You should have told me. I know, he said. But you were already carrying enough. She studied him. You still protect me, even after everything. I think part of me always will. He slid an envelope across the table. I found this in the firm's archives. It's evidence of the money laundering scheme. It implicates Alan and 2 board members. Rachel held it, but didn't open it. What do you want me to do with this? It's your choice. You don't owe me anything. 6th, moral ambiguities, Rachel. Waited days before opening the envelope. Inside were names, transactions, offshore accounts. Enough to bring down powerful people. Enough to ruin what was left of Alan. She went to the police. But she didn't name Alan. She named the others, the ones who had pressured him, who had orchestrated the scheme, who would replace Alan with a new pawn if left unchecked. When the news broke, the firm imploded. Investigations followed. Alan resigned quietly and disappeared from the headlines. Rachel never heard from him again. She didn't know if sparing him was mercy or weakness. Maybe both. A gallery opening. 6 months later, Rachel opened her first solo exhibition. The theme, fault lines. The paintings were raw, some soft and tender, others chaotic and jagged. Each piece felt like a confession, a question without an answer. Critics called it hauntingly human. The gallery buzzed with polite murmurs. Mark came near the end of the night. He stood before a piece titled The Space Between Us, a swirl of colors divided by a single crack running through the center. It's beautiful, he said. It's not finished, she replied. They stood there for a moment longer. Are we finished? He asked. Rachel smiled sadly. I don't know. Maybe we never will be. Closing scene months passed. Letters came and went. Their lives grew in different directions, tangled by history, softened by time. One day, Rachel sat by the lake near her childhood home, sketching. Her phone buzzed. A message from Mark. I still think about you. Not like before. Not with regret. Just with quiet. I hope you're well. She didn't respond right away. She didn't have to. Some stories don't end with closure. Just a series of moments. Some tender, some painful, threaded through time. Forgiveness, like love, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was choosing not to destroy what remained. Sometimes it was silence that no longer hurt. Rachel closed her sketchbook and looked at the water. It was still, and that was enough. Would you like a follow-up exploring where they are years later? Or a spin-off from another character's point of view, like Alan or one of their mutual friends? 19. Years later. A familiar city. 3 years had passed. Rachel returned to Chicago for a short residency at the Art Institute. An unexpected invitation that felt like a door opening she wasn't sure she wanted to walk through. The skyline hadn't changed, but something inside her had. It wasn't about forgiveness or forgetting anymore. It was about acceptance of herself, of the cracks in her life, of the story that never quite resolved. Her studio was on the 5th floor of a converted textile mill, quiet, sparse. She liked it that way. Most of her work now leaned abstract, color studies, textured memory. One piece in particular consumed her, a dark canvas split by a pale seam, like a wound trying to stitch itself shut. It was called Amnesty. The unexpected visit, late one. Evening just before closing up, Rachel heard the knock. It was Mark. He looked different, grayer at the temples. A little more worn, but still unmistakably him. That quiet steadiness she used to lean on like a wall she hadn't realized she needed. "I saw your name in the paper," he said, stepping inside. "Thought maybe I'd see you here." She didn't speak at first. Just nodded and gestured toward a seat by the large window. They sat in silence for a while, the city flickering outside like a living memory. "Are you happy?" he asked. She exhaled. "I'm whole. That's not the same as happy, but it's better than I used to be." Mark smiled. "That's honest. What about you?" He paused, chewing on the answer. "I'm less angry. I started teaching a few business ethics classes at a community college. Weirdly rewarding," Rachel blinked, amused. "You? Teaching ethics?" Pain breeds perspective. They laughed softly. It felt easier now. 1. The offer, he leaned forward. "I'm moving to New York next month. Got a chance to consult on a nonprofit that's rebuilding small firms destroyed by internal fraud. Thought maybe I'd stop by here before I go." Rachel tilted her head. "That's a long way from your corner office." Mark met her eyes. "Turns out integrity's harder to build than an empire." "I figured it was time to try." She nodded slowly. The moment stretched, quiet and unspoken. "Do you ever think about us?" she asked. He didn't flinch. "I do, but not the way I used to. I don't think about what we lost anymore. I think about how much we managed to survive." There was something kind in the way he said it. No bitterness, no expectation. "Would you have done it differently?" she asked. Mark's face softened. "If I could go back, I would have talked more, listened better, loved you more quietly, not just grandly. But we were different people then." 2. The parting. He stood, brushing off his coat. "I won't ask to see you again. I just wanted to say thank you for not destroying me when you had the chance." Rachel stepped forward, reaching for his hand. "We both survived each other. That has to count for something." They stood close enough to feel each other's warmth, but not close enough to mistake it for what it once was. "Goodbye, Mark," she said. He smiled, kissed her on the forehead, softly, like a memory, and left. A new opening. That night, Rachel walked to the gallery hosting her newest piece. Amnesty hung in the center of the room, surrounded by pieces that told stories only she could read. Loss, survival, defiance, love that bent but didn't break. A young couple stood in front of the canvas, murmuring about what it meant. "Do you think it's about heartbreak?" the woman asked. "No," the man replied. "I think it's about letting go." Rachel stood behind them, listening with a small, quiet smile. Final scene later, in her empty studio, Rachel sat by the window. The city breathed around her. Lights blinked like heartbeats in the dark. She poured a glass of wine, opened her sketchpad, and began drawing again. No longer trying to fix the past, just tracing the shape of what had come from it. There were still cracks. But there was light too, and for the first time in a long while, Rachel felt not just whole, she felt ready. Mark had always imagined New York as the city of second chances. But in reality, it was a city of distractions, noisy, fast, layered in anonymity, which, for a man who once craved order and control, was unexpectedly freeing. His office was modest now, no glass walls, no views of lakes or boardrooms. He worked in an old brick building in Brooklyn, helping small business owners recover from financial trauma. Most had been betrayed by partners, spouses, friends. Their stories mirrored his own, and maybe that's why he cared more now than he ever did before. He still thought of Rachel sometimes, late at night, or when a painting caught his eye and reminded him of the texture of her brushstrokes. But it wasn't longing, it was gratitude. She had let him go without cruelty, and in doing so, had given him the gift of self-reconstruction. Then, one morning, she showed up. 6. Reappearance. He was reviewing case files when he looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, Rachel. Same calm presence, but sharper now, like she'd distilled into a quieter power. "I had a show in Soho," she said. "Thought I'd drop by before I head back to Chicago." Mark stood slowly, his heart both racing and still. "I thought you didn't want to see me again." "I didn't," she said, "but then I realized some stories don't end, they just pause." He motioned her inside. She walked slowly, eyes taking in the peeling brick walls, the light filtering through the blinds. "It suits you," she said. Mark smiled. "This place doesn't lie to me." "Neither do I anymore," Rachel said softly. The proposition. They walked to a nearby cafe, quiet, tucked between a record store and a used bookstore, the kind of place that could only exist in a city that never stopped reinventing itself. "I'm starting something," Rachel said over her coffee. "A foundation for artists rebuilding their lives after loss, divorce, illness, trauma. I want to offer not just money but space, healing through work." Mark blinked. "That sounds ambitious." "And important," she leaned in. "I want you to consult on it, help with structure, accountability. I know it's messy, and I know we're messy, but I trust you with this." There was a beat of silence. "You really think we can work together again?" he asked. Rachel shrugged. "I don't know, but I think we understand each other in a way most people don't." Mark looked at her, not as the woman who had betrayed him, but the one who had survived him just as he had survived her. "I'll do it," he said. Boss. The return of Alan 2 months later, the Foundation's launch, was approaching. Mark was coordinating legal frameworks. Rachel was lining up artists and patrons. There was friction, of course there was, but it was purposeful. They fought with each other now, not against. Then Rachel received an envelope at her studio. No. Return address. Inside, a single photograph. Alan, standing outside a federal courthouse, in cuffs. Below it, a note in sharp, clean handwriting. "Thought you should know. Some ghosts don't stay buried. A friend." Rachel stared at it for a long time. Not because she was surprised, but because she wasn't. Part of her had always known Alan would resurface, just not like this. She didn't tell Mark right away. Checks. The dilemma. When she finally did, Mark was quiet. "He's being indicted for obstruction and conspiracy," she said, laying the photo on his desk. Mark leaned back in his chair, sighing. "So it's finally catching up to him." Rachel nodded. "He'll probably try to reach out. I need to know, if he does, do you want me to walk away?" Mark stared at her for a long time. "No," he said eventually. "You need closure. Just promise me you won't let him spin it. He's always been good at that. 30. Open ending." Rachel visited Alan once, just once. He was in a holding facility, thinner, tired, but still trying to smile. "I guess you got what you wanted," he said, voice tinged with bitter amusement. "No," she replied. "None of us got what we wanted. We just survived what we had." He laughed quietly. "You always had the sharpest lines." She stood. "Goodbye, Alan," he called after her. "What about forgiveness?" Rachel paused at the door. "I think forgiveness is what we give ourselves. You're not part of that anymore." She left him there, in a sterile room full of shadows and regret. Back in New York, she joined Mark at the Foundation's first event. Artists mingled. Paintings whispered. There was laughter and wine and the weight of something new. "You okay?" Mark asked her later, as they watched the sunset from the rooftop. "I think so," she said. "Are you?" He didn't answer, right away. Then, "I think we're both finally building something that won't collapse." They stood there in the golden light, not holding hands, not kissing, just present, whole. Maybe it was love, maybe it was peace, or maybe, finally, it was just enough. The Foundation, now known as Reframe, had grown beyond what either Rachel or Mark expected. They had expanded to multiple cities, launched residencies, and hosted annual exhibitions that drew attention from critics and collectors alike. But for both of them, it was never about acclaim. It was about atonement. That year's standout artist was a soft-spoken woman in her early 30s who called herself Elia Ward. Her sculptures were haunting, twisted bronze forms, fragmented yet elegant, as if frozen mid-collapse. There was pain in her work, but also beauty, grace even. Rachel felt drawn to her, something about the way Elia moved. Carefully, like she was always waiting for something to catch up to her. Then, one evening, Rachel saw her speaking with a man near the gallery entrance, tall, cold-eyed, unfamiliar. Their exchange was brief, but Elia looked shaken afterward, slipping away before Rachel could ask anything. Later, Rachel found a file she hadn't noticed before. Elia's artist application. Only, it didn't exist in the system. Secrets unravel Mark. Ran the background check himself. It turned up nothing. No birth certificate. No legal name match. Not even a driver's license under Elia Ward. "What if she's in trouble?" Rachel asked. "We founded this place to help people like her. And to protect people from what we used to be," Mark replied carefully. Rachel hesitated. "You think she's lying?" "I think she's running." 3. Elia's story. Rachel confronted her the next morning. No accusations, just questions. "I know you're scared," Rachel said softly, "but this place only works if you trust it." "If you trust me." Elia's eyes welled with tears. "My real name is Lena Harrow. My husband was a prosecutor in Miami. He was laundering money through tech startups. I found out. I thought I could expose him quietly. Instead, I ended up in the hospital." Rachel inhaled sharply. "I faked my death," Elia continued. "Burned the ID, got help from someone in a protection network. I never meant to drag the Foundation into this." Rachel sat still. A woman destroyed by betrayal. A life rebuilt from ash. It echoed so much of her own past that it felt like a mirror. "You need to tell Mark," Rachel said. "If that man you were speaking to is connected to your husband, we need to know what we're facing." Elia shook her head. "You think he'll let me stay?" Rachel met her gaze. "He will if I tell him you deserve to." Tell. A choice in the shadows. Mark took it harder than Rachel expected. "You want to hide a fugitive?" "She's not the criminal," Rachel said. "She's us. 10 years ago." Mark sat down, rubbing his temples. "This foundation can't survive a scandal. If word gets out, then we stand with her," Rachel said quietly. "Or we become everything we promised we wouldn't." There was a long silence. Then Mark stood. I want a full account of her past, names, paper trail. If I'm going to help her disappear again, I need to know what I'm covering. Rachel nodded, and for the first time in days, Elias smiled. Open or bittersweet ending weeks later, Elia's ex-husband was arrested at a tech gala in Seattle, tipped off anonymously, evidence dumped into the DOJ's inbox like a ghostly confession. The man Rachel saw speaking to Elia? A fixer, now cooperating with authorities. Elia vanished again, this time with new papers, a new name, a new start in another city far away. Rachel watched her board the plane alone, heart full and hollow all at once. Back at the foundation, Mark placed a new sculpture in the courtyard, one of Elia's last. A bent arc of iron emerging from stone, a piece titled Resilience. Years had passed, wounds had closed, not cleanly, but completely, and one night, as Rachel and Mark stood on the rooftop once more, the city glowing below them, Rachel turned to him. Do you regret any of it? He thought for a moment. No, he said, because it brought us here. 36. A new life for Elia Harrow, now legally Iris Vale, settled into the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. Her new identity came with a modest cottage tucked between pine trees, a part-time teaching role at a local arts co-op, and a community too small to ask many questions, but peace, as she learned, was fragile. Every creak in the floor at night still made her tense. Every unknown number on her phone turned her stomach. Her ex-husband's arrest hadn't guaranteed safety. Men like him had long arms, long grudges. Still, in her solitude, Iris sculpted again. Only now, her work was different. Softer curves, lighter materials. No more rusted iron or jagged edges. She was making space for tenderness in her art, even if she couldn't always do it in her heart. Then, one rainy evening, a note appeared on her doorstep. You still owe me one, Lena. I'm calling it in soon. A. No envelope, no footprints. No name, but she knew exactly who A was. 7. The fixer returns A was Avery Shaw, the man who once helped her vanish and who Rachel had seen her speaking to outside the gallery. A man with no official record, rumored to have been ex-CIA or NSA, or just very good at knowing things. She hadn't heard from him in over a year, not since he arranged her last identity switch. She thought she was done with him. Clearly, she wasn't. The next day, she received coordinates via burner phone, a meetup. No explanations. She debated burning it all, his note, the phone, the life she'd built, but she knew Avery too well. He didn't make idle threats, and she couldn't let her past catch up to her. Again. Meanwhile, in New York, Mark and Rachel had begun noticing small signs of surveillance. Rachel's inbox had been hit with phishing attempts. Mark's background check software flagged 3 unauthorized searches for Elia's foundation file, and someone had made a generous, anonymous donation labeled simply, "For the girl with many names." They had a choice to make. Do we go back in? Mark asked her late one night. Help her again? Rachel hesitated. I'm not sure she wants our help this time. That doesn't mean she doesn't need it. Cow. The meetup Iris arrived at the coordinates, an abandoned gas station near the Washington border. Avery was already there, sitting on the hood of a black Jeep, eating an apple like he didn't have a care in the world. You came, he said, hopping off. Don't flatter yourself. What do you want? Avery handed her a folder. Thick, stamped confidential. A tech investor in Seattle is building a platform to identify fugitives through AI-enhanced facial recognition. One of his beta scans pinged you. I intercepted the data, but the project's gaining traction. She skimmed the file, pages of photos, red lines drawn across aliases, a timeline that could unwind everything she'd hidden. You want me to stop him? She asked. No, Avery said with a sly smile. I want us to stop him. Together. 40. A dangerous proposition, Avery explained the plan: sabotage the project, destroy the training data, and ensure the investor, Miles Cartwright, never made it past beta testing. Cartwright, as it turned out, had built his empire on data laundering and shady partnerships, including Aaliyah's ex-husband before his arrest. "If Cartwright goes down," Avery said, "it'll tie up your loose ends. You'll be free. But if I get caught, you vanish again. Or you die. But you won't get caught." Iris paced the gravel. "I can't ask Rachel and Mark to cover for me again," she said. "You won't have to. They're already watching. Pater reunion." And Risk Rachel met Iris at a roadside diner 2 days later. No questions asked, just a hug that said, "I know." Mark joined later. "We'll help," he said. "But this is the last time we walk into the fire." "I understand," Iris whispered. Together, the three of them planned. Not a crime, a correction, as Rachel put it. They'd expose Cartwright for what he was, leak his dealings to the press, and cripple the AI project from the inside. They had 2 weeks. 2. Bittersweet conclusion, for now. On the night of the operation, Iris stood on the rooftop of Cartwright's office building, the wind slicing across her skin. The data breach had gone as planned. Evidence dumped, accounts frozen. Faces exposed. But then she saw a security team entering the floor below, 2 minutes ahead of schedule. "I have to run," she said into the mic. "Now." She didn't wait for a response. She vanished into the night. Back in New York, Rachel received a painting in the mail months later. One of Iris's sculptures, cast in bronze, hollow in the center. On the base, a single inscription: "There is peace in movement. Don't wait for it to come to you." There was no return address. Just like before, she was gone. And once again, Rachel and Mark were left with the weight of helping someone heal and watching them disappear into their own version of survival. 43. The New Arrival. 3 months passed. Spring turned the trees outside the Harrow Foundation's studio space pale green. Rachel had just finished curating a new exhibit, Edges and Echoes, a blend of sculpture and sound, when she saw the email. Applicant: Adrian Vega. Medium: kinetic sculpture. Background: former architect, nomadic. No permanent address. Recommended by a mutual friend. Attached was a sample of his work. A towering structure of interlocking metal bands that moved with air currents, eerily reminiscent of Elia's early work. Rachel showed the email to Mark without a word. He read it, looked up, and whispered. She sent him. 44. Adrian Vega's arrival. Adrian arrived with nothing but a backpack and a weathered sketchbook. Charismatic but private, with Mediterranean features and a faint accent no one could place. "I heard this place nurtures artists who fall between the cracks," he told Rachel during their first one-on-one. "I'm good at finding the cracks." He took the farthest studio, worked at night, kept to himself, but he watched, listened, left doors just barely ajar. Within a week, Rachel was sure this wasn't just an artist, he was a message. The secret he carried. Rachel waited until he trusted her, late one night, over a bottle of wine and unfinished. Sketches he finally spoke. "She's safe," he said, "but not for long." Rachel stiffened. "She's with Avery?" Adrian nodded. "But Cartwright didn't take the fall like they thought. Someone else took the hit. He's coming for anyone who touched his code, including her." Rachel's voice was ice. "Why? Tell me this." "Because," Adrian said, "she can't trust anyone else, but she still trusts you." He slid a tiny drive across the table. "This is everything she found. If something happens to her, you'll know what to do." 46. Mark's dilemma. When Rachel told Mark, he stared at the drive like it was a live grenade. "We said we were out. She doesn't have anyone else. And we barely got out clean last time." "Then let's stay clean," Rachel said. "We don't expose ourselves. We go public with Cartwright. Leak it all. Mark considered it. His jaw tightened. "Do you want justice?" he asked, "or revenge?" Rachel couldn't answer. Cartwright's reach. A week later, the Foundation's servers were hit. Not ransomware. A search and clone. Whoever it was didn't want to destroy, just to know. Then Rachel's personal email was breached. Mark's private investigator friend turned up dead in what the police called a home accident. They weren't dealing with a tech mogul. They were dealing with a machine. The reckoning approaches. Adrian vanished the next morning, but he left behind a note. "She's going dark. Cartwright's hunting. If you're reading this, you have one choice: run or finish it." Rachel and Mark sat in silence. "We could leave," he said. "Shut the Foundation down. Start over somewhere else." "And let him keep doing this?" she asked. "No," Rachel said finally. "We finish it." 49. Open ending. The final chapter opens with Rachel standing outside a federal building in D.C., the drive in her hand, a decision waiting to be made. Give it to the authorities, trust the system, or send it to every journalist, every whistleblower. Channel every platform at once. Inside her pocket is a note Elia once left her, folded 1,000 times. "Secrets don't bury themselves. Someone always has to dig." She steps forward, but the story ends there. Does she expose Cartwright? Does she disappear, like Aaliyah? Or does the past, once again, swallow them all? The final image. A statue in the Harrow Foundation courtyard, cast. In iron, welded into a question mark. Empty at its center, waiting. Rachel didn't sleep the night before. She and Mark had argued, quietly, like old lovers with too much history to shout anymore. "This ends us," he had warned. "You release that drive, we become targets again. There's no walking it back." But she'd made up her mind. At 3:47 a.m., sitting alone in their study, Rachel uploaded the drive to 4 encrypted channels, tipped 3 independent journalists she trusted, and posted a redacted teaser on the Foundation's official blog. The art of hiding truth has become more sophisticated. So must the art of revealing it. Then she shut her laptop and watched the morning take its breath. Cartwright reacts by noon. Ye Cartwright code was trending. The leaked data revealed illicit facial recognition partnerships with authoritarian, government secret surveillance of political activists, ghost profiles created from stolen medical records, including names connected to Iris's past identities, buried evidence tying. Cartwright's funding to offshore shell corporations, one of which had paid Aaliyah's ex-husband's legal fees. The storm was instant. But Cartwright didn't deny the leak. He posted a single message on his private feed. "Truth is negotiable. Loyalty is not. You'll hear from me soon, Rachel Harrow." 52. The price of truth. That night, Rachel's car alarm wailed at 2 a.m. The studio's front windows were smashed. Nothing taken, just a photo left on the main desk. It showed her and Elia outside the Foundation, dated 5 years earlier, across the photo, in red marker, still watching. Mark packed a go bag. "We leave tonight." Rachel shook her head. "If we run, it means he wins." Meanwhile, Iris on the run. Iris moved through cities like a ghost, Seattle to Vancouver, then Montreal. Each new alias lasted only days. Her face was too well known now. Cartwright's AI had spread into the black market, used by bounty hunters and mercenary trackers. But one night, in a safe house above an abandoned bookstore in Quebec, her phone chirped once. "Rachel, it's done." "He knows. Stay dark." "You're not alone." Iris smiled, just a little. She burned the phone, but kept the message in memory. The Foundation reborn Rachel and Mark didn't run. Instead, they renamed the Foundation the Veil Project, a nod to Iris's alias, to all, those who lived in shadow. They shifted the focus. Art and justice. Whistleblowers who used sculpture. survivors who painted their grief. Coders turned collage artists, anonymous, unapologetic. It became a movement, but their lives were no longer their own. Surveillance became background noise. Threats came weekly. Still, the art kept coming, and with it, stories. A final message one day, nearly a year later, Rachel opened a letter with no return address. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, sharp, distinctly Aaliyah. You were the only one who never asked me to be someone I wasn't. I don't know if I'll ever stop. Running, but knowing you're there gives me somewhere to run toward. If I disappear, remember, we made something out of the silence. You gave my ghost a name. Inside the envelope was a photo, a sculpture in the middle of a forest clearing, steel vines twisted into a woman's form, her arms open, face turned to the sky, below it, etched into stone. Forgiveness isn't freedom, but it's how you walk toward it. Bittersweet ending, Rachel stared at the photo for a long time, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She didn't know where the statue stood, or whether Iris was still alive. But she knew this. Their truth had broken something open, not just in the world, but in themselves. And while there were no easy endings, no full absolution, no perfect closure, there was meaning, there was art, there was memory, and maybe, just maybe, there was peace hidden in the ambiguity. 2 months after the leak, Arthur Cartwright was found dead in his Hamptons estate. Apparent overdose, said the headlines, but Rachel knew better. The autopsy was sealed. The tech world murmured about suicide, disgrace, legacy, but in the encrypted forums where vigilantes and corporate ghosts gathered, a different name began to appear. Ocellus. Not a person, not a company, a collective. The whispers said Ocellus had inherited Cartwright's code, but stripped it of ethics, morality, even intent. It was pure function now, surveillance without oversight, behavioral prediction weaponized. No more single tyrant. Now it was everyone and no one. Iris and the stranger Iris, now living as Marie Langlois, worked in a quiet antique bookstore on the outskirts of Lyon, France. The city wrapped her in anonymity until he walked in. The stranger had soft eyes, messy curls, and an odd old-fashioned gentleness. Said his name was Theo. He asked about rare editions, told her stories about his grandmother's secret collection, lingered too long at the counter. He didn't flinch at her evasive answers. One day, he left a note in a second-hand copy of the Trial. We all live in systems that would rather we disappear. I'd rather discover who you are. She felt something inside her stir, a feeling she hadn't trusted in years. Hope. Dangerous, luminous hope. The algorithm returns. Back in New York, Rachel received a call from a contact inside a cybersecurity firm. They're building profiles based on art. The algorithm's evolved. It doesn't just recognize faces anymore. It recognizes expression, style, medium, movement. She felt the bottom drop out. They're tracking the artists through their work. Rachel looked at the upcoming exhibition list. Half of the pieces came from anonymous contributors, most of whom had fled regimes, war zones, or private tyrants. If the art was now a fingerprint, they were all exposed. The choice Rachel called Iris. They hadn't spoken in a year. I know you're not Marie, Rachel said, silence on the other end. Then, I know you're not safe. I don't care, Rachel said. They're coming for everyone now, and they're using our truth to do it. Then we take it back, Iris said softly. The final movement begins. The Veil Project went underground. Artists worked in cipher, creating pieces laced with encrypted data, subversive truths buried in paint strokes and sculpture molds. Theo, revealed to be a data architect disillusioned by his former employers, joined Iris in designing a counter-algorithm, something to scramble Ocellus's predictive model. something that could hide art in plain sight. They called it palimpsest mark, now deeply embedded in global activist networks, helped push palimpsest into rogue galleries and subnets. It wasn't a revolution. Not yet, but it was a seed. Bittersweet open ending. Continued Iris stood at the threshold of a new studio. No windows, only skylight. Theo leaned in the doorway, watching her silently. "You're not scared anymore?" he asked. "I'm always scared," she said. "But for the first time, I'm not running from it." Outside, the city continued its digital slumber. But within this hidden space, the hum of something new began, a sculpture in progress, steel vines again, but this time twining upward toward a figure half-formed, half memory, half future. Weeks passed, and the world turned even more surveillance-heavy, more oppressive. Cartwright's empire may have crumbled, but Ocellus was everywhere. It spread like a virus, making the boundaries between the private and the public even more porous. Governments, corporations, and rogue actors, everyone was using it. But there were those who fought back, even from the margins. Palimpsest, the hidden network that Iris, Rachel, and Theo had built, was becoming a symbol. Artists, writers, hackers, and activists who had once been silent now found a voice. An encrypted one. Pieces of art began appearing across cities, smuggled through secure channels. A mural in Berlin, an augmented reality piece that showed the true cost of government surveillance. A sculptural installation in Mexico City, metal wires that twisted and turned in chaotic shapes, but on closer inspection, revealed the coded messages from those who disappeared in the shadows of Ocellus. Videos, poems, and digital art spread like whispers, not meant to be seen at first glance, but to be understood by those who knew how to read between the lines. The message was simple. Ocellus might be watching, but art could still hide in plain sight. 6-2. The betrayal. But not everyone was playing the game for the same reason. Theo had always been an enigma. Smart, charming, a little too smooth for comfort. As palimpsest gained momentum, he became indispensable to their operation, writing code that kept their identities safe, patching security holes, ensuring that their messages never reached Ocellus's ever-hungry servers. Yet there was something unsettling about his relationship with Rachel. He pushed her to be more aggressive in taking the fight to Ocellus, encouraged her to expose herself, to become the face of the movement. Rachel had trusted him implicitly, but the more she thought about it, the more she saw the cracks in his motives. There was too much ambition in his eyes, too much eagerness to drag Rachel into the public eye. He seemed too eager to put everything on the line. One evening, as they were reviewing new submissions for the upcoming show, Rachel noticed something strange. A backdoor access code hidden in the metadata of a file Theo had sent her. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A direct link to Ocellus. Her heart sank. He'd been feeding them information to the very enemy they were trying to destroy. Confrontation. Rachel's hand trembled as she dialed Theo's number. When he answered, his voice was calm, controlled. "I found it," she said, her voice cold. He paused, a long breath. "Found what?" "The back door. The link to Ocellus in the file you sent me." Theo's laugh was soft. "Rachel, I don't know what you're talking about." "I know you've been working with them," she said. "And I know you've been using me, using all of us. You've been feeding Ocellus every piece of intel you could get your hands on. Haven't you?" Theo didn't deny it. His voice was quieter now. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." "Why?" Rachel asked. "Why betray us?" "Because I never believed in this fight like you did," he admitted. "You see it as art, as truth, as justice." He paused, and Rachel could hear the smile in his voice. "But all I saw was opportunity, and the way I saw it, Ocellus was just the beginning." C4. The fall that night, Rachel and Mark made the hard decision to take down palimpsest, at least for a while. They couldn't risk Theo's treachery exposing them to Ocellus. Too many lives were in the balance. But as they began wiping servers and deleting files, Rachel received an anonymous message. The encryption was too advanced to trace. You think you can hide from us? You think you can erase the future? It was signed with a single cryptic symbol, Ocellus. She stared at the message, heart racing. The game had changed. It wasn't just about art anymore. It was about survival. And Theo? He disappeared the following morning, his apartment empty, his phone turned off. The aftermath months passed. The Veil project was shut down, at least temporarily, as Rachel and Mark retreated into the shadows once again. They didn't trust anyone, not even their most loyal allies. Too many spies, too many traitors, too many unknowns. But the fight wasn't over. Not for Rachel. Late one night, she sat in the dark, looking out over the city, and she remembered something Elia had once told her. Art is a mirror, but sometimes it's a weapon. She'd always thought Elia's words were a philosophical musing, an artist's whimsy. Now she understood. Art wasn't just a weapon against oppression, it was the weapon. And it was time to make sure it was aimed in the right direction. The return of the ghost Iris, still in hiding, read the encrypted message. From Rachel. She knew this was it. The tipping point. No more running, no more hiding. It was time to fight back. She packed the last of her things and walked out of the safe house. She was done being scared. She was done being a ghost. The future wasn't a question anymore. It was a war. Final ending. An unfinished war. The story ends with the final scene. A blank canvas. Who would win this time? Ocellus, with its cold, calculating reach, or the broken, scattered remnants of palimpsest, with their wild, defiant art? The city's skyline stretches out before them, bathed in twilight, as if the answer is still waiting to be written. Some battles, Rachel realized, don't have clean victories. They don't have resolutions that tie neatly into endings. But maybe that was the point. And as she took the first step into the next fight, she knew that this was just the beginning. Theo's return came unexpectedly. After months of silence, the first sign of him was a message slipped into an encrypted channel used by palimpsest's last remaining allies. It was coded, disguised as a harmless old book review from a forgotten literary journal, but Rachel recognized the handwriting. It was a signal. I made a mistake. I want to fix it. Ocellus doesn't own me anymore. Rachel's gut tightened. He was playing her again, wasn't he? Maybe this was part of his game. Maybe he was trying to get back inside the circle. But there was something in the message, an edge of rawness, of desperation, that made her pause. She couldn't be sure, but she needed to find out. The Shadow's return, Theo had relocated to an isolated cabin somewhere in the Catskills, hidden deep in a forest, miles from any major road or city. When Rachel arrived, she was tense, on guard, her mind running through all the possible ways this could go wrong. She didn't trust him, but she knew she needed information. The fight with Ocellus was far from over, and palimpsest's few remaining. Threads were all but unraveling. Theo was waiting when she arrived, standing at the door, hands shoved deep into the pockets of a worn jacket. His face was unshaven, his eyes bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days. But he wasn't smiling. There was no warmth in his expression, just cold regret. "Rachel," he said, his voice low, "I've been trying to make sense of it. Everything. I did. Everything I thought I was doing. It was wrong. I know that now." Rachel said nothing. She crossed her arms, staring at him, not sure if this was an apology or a trap. "You're a liar, Theo, and I don't know if I can trust anything you say anymore." "I know." He nodded, his gaze dropping to the ground. I didn't come here to make excuses. I came to give you something. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small black USB drive, holding it out to her. This will destroy Ocellus. This will be their end, I swear it. Rachel took the drive, eyeing it with suspicion. Her mind raced. Could it be true? Could he have finally turned against them, or was this another game? Why? She asked. Why should I believe you? Because it's the only thing that makes sense now. Theo replied, his voice thick with emotion. I used to think I was a part of something bigger. I thought Ocellus was the future, control, order, power. But all I've seen since is destruction. You were right, Rachel. It was never about freedom. It was always about control. Rachel didn't lower her guard. And now you want to fix it? I don't want to fix it. I want to end it. Once and for all. 69. A dangerous gamble. Rachel went back to the hideout, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. She'd spent so many years thinking of Theo as the enemy. But what if this was real? What if he had turned? What if this was the key to ending Ocellus once and for all? Mark was waiting for her, as always, the ever-present voice of reason. She showed him the USB drive. This could be a trap, Mark warned. His eyes narrowed as he analyzed the device. You know that, right? Theo has never played on the side of the angels. You can't just trust him because he says so. Rachel exhaled, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on her. I don't know what to think anymore. But if this is real, it's the best chance we have to take down Ocellus. Mark remained silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning the room. Finally, he spoke. Then we'll run the algorithm on it. We'll test it. If it checks out, we use it. But if it's a trap, if it's another lie, I'll be the first one to shut it down. Rachel nodded. Fair enough. 70. The Reckoning. The algorithm was run. The code within the USB drive was complex, far more sophisticated than anything Ocellus had ever produced. It was the kind of code that could break the system from the inside out, slowly, methodically, until it crumbled to dust. Theo hadn't lied, but it wasn't without cost. The moment the code was activated, Ocellus would begin to unravel. But it would also send a signal, a warning. It would alert every major player involved in Ocellus, from corporate execs to shadowy government officials, that the system was under threat. The fight would become public, and once Ocellus collapsed, the power vacuum would be filled with whoever was quickest to seize it. The world would be in chaos for a time. There would be no clean victory. Rachel stood at the terminal, fingers hovering. Above the enter key, her heart pounding in her chest, she was ready to burn it all down, ready to fight the system to its last breath. But she knew that after this there would be no going back. There would be no forgiveness, no redemption, only ashes and maybe, just maybe, something better would rise from them. She pressed the key. The aftermath. The explosion came quietly in the form of a data collapse. Ocellus's mainframe began to glitch, data leaking out like blood from an open wound. Within minutes, the servers were down. The algorithms collapsed. Ocellus was no more. But Rachel wasn't celebrating. In the ensuing weeks, the world spun into chaos. Governments scrambled to cover their tracks. Corporations fell apart. The people who had relied on Ocellus's algorithms now had nothing. The power dynamics shifted violently, creating a fractured world where no one knew who was in control. Theo's whereabouts remained a mystery. Some said he had disappeared. Others claimed he was hiding in the aftermath, trying to keep his hands clean. The one thing Rachel knew for sure, he had played his part, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he would be back. The cost of truth. The final image was of Rachel standing on a rooftop in New York, staring out at the skyline. The city was still breathing, still turning, but something had shifted. The future was uncertain, filled with shadows and possibilities. Would things ever be the same? No. But maybe, just maybe, they could be better. Not perfect, not without struggle, but better. As the last light of the day faded, days blurred together as Rachel navigated the aftermath of Ocellus's collapse. The streets were filled with confusion, panic, and a sense of freedom that came with the loss of such a powerful force controlling the world. People had begun to rally, not against the chaos that followed, but toward the possibility of something new, something unregulated, something they could shape. But for Rachel, that hope was tempered by the heavy weight of responsibility. It was one thing to destroy a system. It was another to rebuild society from the ground up, piece by piece, with no clear map to follow. The underground movement began to form quickly. It wasn't just a collection of dissidents. It was a network of former Ocellus operatives, hackers, political figures, and ordinary citizens who had seen the cracks in the system and wanted to forge something better. But as it grew, it became apparent that not all of them shared the same ideals. Some wanted power in their hands, others wanted control through information. The vision of freedom, while alluring, was a slippery one. Rachel found herself at the center of it all, trying to steer the movement in a direction she could stomach. The temptation to seize control, to shape the future in her image, was strong. But she knew better than to think she could trust anyone fully. The world was fractured, and the fragments could not be glued together easily. It was a game of shadows, one that had always been in play. Whispers in the dark Mark had warned her about the dangers of holding too much power. He had seen it all, the rise and fall of systems, the betrayals, the lies that tore down what they had built. His skepticism, while often a source of tension between them, had been invaluable. But even he could see the writing on the wall now. Rachel had become a figurehead for a movement, and with that came enemies, not just from the outside, but from within. "Rachel, you need to be careful," Mark said one evening, as they sat in the dimly lit safe house that had once been used by Ocellus's lower-level operatives. His tone was serious, no longer laced with the joking sarcasm he'd often used to mask his own doubts. "Not everyone who joined us has the same goals. You can't keep assuming that they're all here for the right reasons." "I know," Rachel admitted, staring at the blueprints spread across the table. There were scattered maps, strategic plans, and contacts that stretched across the globe. It was all starting to feel like another version of the same fight. She had thought she was destroying the system to free people. Instead, it felt like she had opened the door to an even more dangerous game. "I've seen it before," Mark continued. "People don't just change because you knock down the walls. You can't expect to fix the world without making some hard decisions. And one of those decisions may be that not everyone should have a seat at the table." Rachel exhaled, frustration pooling inside her. "So what, we just play the same game as Ocellus? Become the new tyrants?" "No," Mark said quickly, leaning forward, "but we don't have the luxury of assuming everyone wants the same thing. Some people who are here for the wrong reasons, will start to make moves. They'll use us." Rachel didn't respond right away. Her thoughts turned to Theo. It had been weeks since he had disappeared into the ether, and while part of her believed he had gone to ground for good, another part of her couldn't shake the feeling that he would return. He always did. But when? And what would he want when he did? 5. A whisper in the night. That night, Rachel received an encrypted message. The address was unfamiliar, the content straightforward. "You've made a mess of everything, Rachel. The fall of Ocellus was inevitable. But you're wrong to think it's over. There are still things you don't understand. Things I'll help you with. If you want to know the truth about the movement you're leading, meet me at the docks in 3 hours. No signature, no other explanation, just a date and a time. Rachel knew immediately that it was Theo. Her pulse quickened. What did he know? What game was he playing now? And why contact her? He had been silent for so long, and now he was back, offering cryptic warnings like an old ghost trying to haunt her. but part of her knew that if there was any chance of getting the full story, of uncovering what truly lay behind the collapse, of Ocellus and the future of the new world, it had to be Theo. He was the one person who could see the hidden threads, the one who had pulled the strings of the entire system. The meeting. The docks were empty at this hour, the distant hum of the city's heartbeat fading as Rachel's footsteps echoed off the concrete. The moonlight cast long shadows, and there, in the distance, a figure stood against the backdrop of the dark water, familiar, unmistakable. Theo. He didn't look like the man she remembered. He looked older, haggard, as if he had been running for a long time. His face was thinner, his eyes hard and distant, but there was something familiar in the way he stood, something that made her stomach churn with uncertainty. "Rachel," he said quietly when she was close enough. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "I'm sorry it had to come to this." "Don't waste your breath, Theo," she replied, the anger bubbling up despite her attempts to remain calm. "I don't trust you. You've lied to me too many times." "I know," he answered, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I'm not here to lie anymore. I'm here to tell you what you're missing, what you don't see." "Go on," Rachel said, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was ready for the next betrayal, ready for the twist that would make her distrust him even more. But part of her, the small, naive part, was still waiting for the truth. Theo stepped closer, his gaze flickering toward the horizon. "Rachel, Ocellus was never the problem. It wasn't the algorithms. It wasn't the data. It was the people who used the system, the ones who pulled the strings." Rachel couldn't stop thinking about Theo's words. The idea that Ocellus's fall wasn't an accident haunted her. It wasn't just a broken system. It was an intentional collapse, engineered by someone or something that she couldn't yet grasp. Every step she had taken in dismantling the organization, in building something new, now seemed like a game in which she had been a pawn all along. The movement had grown rapidly since she began leading it. People, hungry for change, had flocked to her cause, believing that freedom could come from the ashes of Ocellus. But as the weeks passed, Rachel began to see cracks in the foundation of her own leadership. She wasn't just rebuilding a broken world. She was trying to create something from nothing, and the pressure was starting to show. Mark had grown more distant, his warnings becoming sharper. "This isn't a war you can win, Rachel. There are too many players, too many interests at stake." But Rachel didn't want to hear it. She couldn't afford to doubt herself now, not when they were so close. Not when she had already sacrificed so much. Echoes of betrayal. Rachel had arranged another secret meeting with Theo, this time away from the prying eyes of the movement. They met at an old warehouse, an inconspicuous spot in the city's industrial district, the kind of place where nothing stood out, nothing except for the whispers of its past. As she walked through the narrow alley toward the warehouse, Rachel's mind raced. She had to know the truth. She had to understand who was pulling the strings, who was controlling the chaos. Theo was already there when she arrived, standing in the dim light, leaning against a rusted pillar. His eyes flickered to her as she approached, his expression unreadable. "Rachel," he said, his voice still low, "I told you the truth was darker than you wanted to hear." "Then tell me what I need to know," Rachel snapped, her patience thinning. "Who's behind this? Who's really controlling everything?" Theo looked at her with something like pity. "The movement you're building isn't what you think it is. The people you're working with, some of them were never on your side. They were just waiting for you to take the bait." Rachel felt a chill run through her. "Who?" she asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. "The ones who didn't want Ocellus to fall," Theo replied. "They needed it to collapse, to give rise to something new, something more malleable, and they've been watching you ever since." Rachel's stomach twisted. Who are they? Who's really behind this? Theo exhaled slowly, glancing toward the shadows as if checking to see if anyone else was listening. It's not just individuals anymore. It's a network, a collective. People who have always been behind the curtain, controlling the flow of information, manipulating the levers of power. You've met them before, Rachel. You just didn't know who they were. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. Her mind flashed to the countless meetings she had attended, the people she had spoken with, many of them faceless, nameless figures in the shadows. Had they been watching her the whole time? You're telling me this is all part of some bigger plan? She asked, incredulity rising in her chest. Theo's eyes narrowed. I'm telling you that you're being used, and the moment you stop being useful, you'll be discarded. You have to stop them before they stop you. 80. The game of shadows. Rachel returned to the movement with a growing sense of unease. The pieces weren't fitting together the way she had imagined. The vision of a liberated world, free from the shackles of Ocellus's control, was slipping through her fingers. She met with Mark that evening, hoping to find some clarity, but his mood was as grim as hers. I don't like this, Rachel, he said, his voice a harsh whisper. You're walking into something far deeper than you realize. Theo's not the only one playing games here. What do you mean? She asked, feeling a knot form in her stomach. People we've trusted, people we thought were on our side, they've been moving in the shadows. I've seen things, heard things. There's more to this than just dismantling Ocellus. Someone wants control, and they're using you to get it. Rachel swallowed, her mind racing. She had known things weren't adding up, but this felt like a betrayal she wasn't ready to face. Who? She demanded. I don't know yet, Mark replied, looking more troubled than she had ever seen him. But I'm getting close. I'm going to find out. Tate. A bitter revelation. As Rachel dug deeper, she found herself trapped in a web of lies. Every step toward the truth only led her further into the maze, and with each new discovery, the walls seemed to close in around her. She found a file, hidden, encrypted, one that contained a list of names. Key figures in the movement, people who had been with her from the beginning. The names, as she scanned them, made her stomach drop. They were all connected. To Ocellus, to the shadow network Theo had warned her about. They had been there from the start, waiting for the right moment to bring her in. She had been their pawn all along, and now they were pulling the strings once more. The breaking point, Rachel sat in silence, the weight of the file pressing down on her. The world around her felt like it was unraveling, and all she had worked for seemed like an illusion. The faces of those she trusted stared back at her, each one a part of the same scheme. Mark had been right all along. She could feel the walls closing in. The movement, the dream of freedom, it was all a farce. And Theo had known it. He had known from the start that this was never about freedom. It was about control. The question now was, what would she do with the truth? 83. The choice. Rachel stood on the edge of everything, her mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. The fight wasn't over. It couldn't be. But the question loomed. Could she continue down this path, knowing that the movement she had built was only another piece in someone? Rachel stood before a crossroads that seemed to stretch out infinitely in every direction, each path filled with uncertainty and danger. The file in her hands, a manifestation of the betrayal she had uncovered, now weighed as heavily on her conscience as the rest of the secrets she'd been unknowingly carrying. The people she thought she could trust, the ones she had fought alongside, were all entangled in the very system she had aimed to dismantle. And yet, the voice in the back of her mind, the one that had guided her this far, whispered, "You can still change this. You can still be the one to decide the future." Mark's words echoed in her thoughts. You're walking into something far deeper than you realize. Had she been too naive? Had she allowed herself to believe the promises of freedom and change, only to be led down a path that mirrored the very oppression she had sought to escape? The city outside her apartment window was a landscape of broken dreams. But beneath the layers of destruction, there were still people, real people, who believed in her, in what she stood for. Could she lead them to a better future? Or was she merely a figurehead in a much larger game of manipulation? The unraveling. The next few days were a blur of frantic planning and secret meetings, with Rachel trying to make sense of the growing puzzle. Theo's cryptic warning, Mark's increasing suspicion, and the damning evidence in her hands were enough to make anyone want to walk away. But Rachel couldn't. She wouldn't. She knew the stakes now, and while part of her longed for escape, for a simpler life away from the chaos, the larger part, no, the only part that had ever truly mattered, wanted to fight. Fight for the people who had placed their trust in her, for the dream of a world, without the puppeteers in the shadows. But at what cost? Her growing paranoia gnawed at her. Every conversation, every interaction now felt like a coded exchange, every word possibly a warning or a clue. The movement's leaders, those she had considered allies, seemed increasingly distant. It was clear they were divided. Some perhaps aware of the deeper games being played, others blissfully ignorant, but all of them pawns in one grand scheme. One name kept resurfacing in her mind: Theo. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was more than just a whistleblower. He had something more at stake, something Rachel couldn't yet understand. But she would. The last confrontation. The moment Rachel had been dreading came sooner than she expected. Late one evening, as the city settled into a quiet hum of life, Rachel met with Theo once more. This time, however, it was different. The warehouse was not as empty as before. The shadows lingered more heavily, like they were watching, waiting for something to unfold. Theo stood there, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Do you finally understand?" he asked, his voice low but carrying a weight she hadn't heard before. Rachel's eyes narrowed as she stepped forward. "What do you want from me, Theo?" His lips twisted into a half-smile. "I've told you everything you need to know, but you still don't see the bigger picture. You never did." Rachel's heart raced. "The bigger picture? You've been playing me from the start." Theo shook his head slowly. "No, I've been trying to save you from becoming a pawn. But you couldn't see it, could you? You wanted so badly to be the hero, to lead a movement, but you didn't know who you were up against. Now the game has changed, and you're right in the middle of it." A chill ran down Rachel's spine. "What game?" He stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper now. "The one they've been playing all along. The one you're part of, whether you like it or not." Before Rachel could respond, a low hum filled the air. The doors to the warehouse creaked, and a group of shadowed figures stepped forward. "They?" Rachel asked, her pulse quickening as the realization hit her.
Curiosity watching with them the hosts made it, but it was I took it. I always was so lazy. I'll see you, but my visit or not. The you saw it in that late on, so holy so this you would did the hit to the if then you all spiraling
downward into an abyss of betrayal. Theo's alliance, the unseen forces pulling at her, were all revealed in that moment. Figures from the movement she had helped lead, men and women she had believed in, now standing in the shadows behind him. They had all been playing a part in the larger game, one in which she was but a temporary pawn. "You told me I could change the world," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You can, Rachel," Theo replied, his voice suddenly soft, almost gentle. "But not in the way you think. You can change the world, but first, you have to understand who controls it. Rachel's mind raced. What was he saying? She'd known that she was being manipulated, but now, in this moment, the reality of it was inescapable. She had been a player in a much larger game, with forces far beyond her control pulling her strings. But there was one thing she hadn't considered: her own power. In the sea of shadows, the unknowns, the conspiracies, and the lies, Rachel still had one advantage: her own will. The moment of truth. Rachel took a step back, her mind reeling. She had to make a choice now, and it couldn't wait. The game she had entered was one of survival. But what did she want to survive for? A world run by these shadowy figures, by Theo and his associates? Or could she fight back and create something real from the ashes of this false rebellion? "Who's really controlling this?" Rachel demanded, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Theo's eyes flickered, the hint of a secret still locked behind them. "You know who they are. You've met them. The people who were always in charge, the ones who never left the room. But they're not the problem. The problem is you, Rachel." She froze. "What do you mean?" "You were always too focused on the idea of freedom, on saving people. You never saw the truth. The city felt quieter the next morning, as if it too was waiting for Rachel to make her next move. The weight of her decision from the night before lingered in the air like the remnants of a thunderstorm. She had walked away from the shadows, from the intricate webs of control and deceit. But leaving them behind didn't mean they were gone. They were still out there, in every corner, every alley, every room that had once felt safe. Rachel sat at her kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of her. She hadn't been able to sleep, hadn't been able to stop thinking about the people she had turned her back on. Theo, Mark, the others. They all had a stake in this fight. But so did she. And she had just walked away from it. What came next? Was it truly possible to rebuild from nothing? Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. She glanced at it but didn't pick it up immediately. It was Mark, the man who had once stood by her side in the fight for something greater. He had warned her, shown her the truth. He had been right about so many things. But now, after the choices she had made, what could he possibly say? The phone buzzed again, more urgently this time. With a sigh, Rachel picked it up, pressing it to her ear. "Rachel," Mark's voice came through, tense but calm. "I know what you're thinking. I know what you've done, but you need to listen to me." "I'm done listening," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "You knew, Mark. You all knew what was going on. You knew about Theo, about the games being played, and yet you said nothing." "Rachel, it's not that simple." His voice softened. "You don't understand what you're up against. They'll come for you. You've made an enemy of the wrong people. You can't just walk away from this." Her heart pounded. The familiar tinge of fear crept back in, but this time it was tempered by something else. It was the sting of her own choices, of the realization that even now she was on the edge of something she couldn't control. "I don't care about them anymore," she said quietly, with more finality than she felt. "I'm done being a pawn in their game, Mark. I'm going to find my own way out." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mark spoke again, his voice was filled with a mix of resignation and urgency. "I'm warning you. You think you're walking away, but you're already in too deep. They won't let you go so easily." Rachel's chest tightened. "They won't let you go so easily." The words echoed in her mind, as if they were a promise, a certainty. What had she really walked away from? "Goodbye, Mark," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Before he could respond, she ended the call, staring at the phone in her hand. There was no turning back now. She had made her choice. But at what cost? Kyat. The gathering storm weeks passed, and the days that followed felt like they were passing in a blur. Rachel went about her life, trying to piece together the fragments of herself that had been shattered in the aftermath of her decisions. She stayed out of the public eye, avoiding the familiar faces and places that might draw attention. Every knock at the door, every ring of the phone sent a jolt of anxiety through her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that someone was always one step behind her. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Her only comfort, if she could call it that, was the underground network of people who still believed in the cause, the ones who hadn't fallen victim to the shadowy powers that had manipulated them. But even they, she soon realized, were not without their own complications. There were whispers of betrayal, rumors of spies within their ranks, of people who still operated under the thumb of the very forces Rachel had tried to escape. But Rachel wasn't going to sit idly by. She had her own plan now, her own way forward. She couldn't undo the past, but she could still fight for something that mattered. It was going to take time, it was going to be dangerous, but it was her fight. She couldn't fight it alone, though. There was only so much one person could do. And so she reached out to the few allies she still trusted, those who had been with her from the start, who had never wavered. But the question remained, could they still trust her? 2. The Unraveling, Part 2. A knock at the door one evening sent Rachel's pulse racing. She wasn't expecting anyone, and no one knew where she lived, except for Theo. She gripped the doorknob, then hesitated. The knock came again, louder this time. She opened the door cautiously, her breath catching. When she saw the figure standing in the dimly lit hallway, it was Mark. His face was haggard, his eyes darkened with something she couldn't place. "I tried to warn you, Rachel," he said, his voice low. "But you didn't listen. You've made a terrible mistake." "Then why are you here?" she shot back, her hand still gripping the door frame, ready to slam it shut if she had to. "I've seen what they're capable of," he continued, stepping into the doorway. "You think you're safe, but they know exactly where you are. They know everything. You've left yourself open, and now you're a target. I can help you, but you have to trust me. One last time." Rachel felt a sharp pang in her chest. The conflict inside her, this push and pull between what she wanted to believe and what she knew to be true, was overwhelming. But Mark was right about one thing. There was no easy way out. If she was going to fight, truly fight, she would need every bit of help she could get. "All right," she said, finally stepping aside to let him in. "But this is it, Mark. We do this, and then we're done. I'm not looking back anymore." Mark nodded, his eyes weary but resolute. "We'll do it together. No more games." A chance at redemption? Days blurred into nights as Rachel and Mark worked together in the shadows, gathering information, planning their next move. Rachel knew that she was walking a fine line between fighting for freedom and... Rachel had grown accustomed to the silence in her apartment, the absence of the phone ringing, the lack of unexpected visitors at her door. It all became a rhythm of sorts. But despite the quiet, the weight of uncertainty still hung in the air. Like a thick fog, it was inescapable. Her partnership with Mark had not been easy. They had both been damaged by their pasts, and every conversation, every plan they made was a delicate negotiation of trust. Sometimes, when Mark spoke to her, she could see the ghosts of their old relationship flicker in his eyes. The man who had once been her confidant, the person she had shared so much with, now hardened by betrayal and wariness. And yet, in the darkness, they had found a common ground. Neither of them was fully certain of where this path would lead, but it had. "To lead somewhere. Are you ready for this?" Mark's voice broke through her thoughts. He stood in the kitchen doorway, his hand gripping the frame as he watched her carefully. The storm outside raged in full force, rain pounding against the windows, thunder rolling like a distant warning. Rachel looked up at him, her resolve hardening. I have no choice. We keep going until we find something to fight for, or until they find us. You're not just trying to get revenge, right? Mark asked cautiously, stepping closer. He had been worried about her, worried that her sense of justice might morph into something more dangerous. This is about stopping them, Rachel, stopping the people who've been pulling the strings. Rachel's eyes locked onto his, a flicker of something, anger, maybe, or fear, dancing behind her gaze. It's about reclaiming my life, Mark, and if that means taking them down along the way, then so be it. He nodded, but said nothing more. They both knew there was no going back now. The choices they had made had led them here, and now they had to see it through, whatever the cost. The web unravels it wasn't long before their pursuit of the truth uncovered a series of connections that were far more twisted than either of them had anticipated. As Rachel dug deeper into the network they were facing, it became clear that they were up against a far-reaching, well-funded operation. People in positions of power, both in business and law enforcement, were involved, and the more they learned, the more dangerous it became. Every meeting they had with their underground allies felt like it could be their last. They had to be careful, they had to be discreet. They had to keep their heads low while everything around them seemed to be collapsing into chaos. The deeper they got, the more Rachel realized that it wasn't just about power anymore. It wasn't just about control or revenge. It was about survival. They were fighting against something much larger than themselves. Rachel, Mark said one evening, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. We can't keep running forever. We need leverage. Something that makes them come to us. Something that gives us the upper hand. Her mind raced. Leverage. What could they possibly have that would make their enemies stop in their tracks? And then it clicked. We need to expose them, she said, the words falling from her lips before she could fully grasp the implications. We need to make them vulnerable. If we leak the information, if we get it into the right hands, then we can force their hand. Mark's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Rachel saw the spark of hope she hadn't seen in him for weeks. It was a risky move, but it was the only one they had left. Tension rising. The plan they devised wasn't without its risks. It would require getting into the heart of the operation, into the systems that controlled everything, and stealing the very information that could bring it all crashing down. Rachel's role would be the most dangerous. She would be the one who had to make the initial contact, the one who would be at the heart of it all. It was a heavy burden to bear, but she knew that if she backed down now, she would never forgive herself. They spent the next few days preparing, gathering intel, setting up false identities, and making sure they had an escape route in case everything went wrong. The tension was palpable. Every phone call felt like it could be the one that betrayed them. Every email a potential link to their enemies. And then, one night, the moment came. Rachel stood outside the building, her heart racing in her chest. She had done this 100 times before in her mind, but now that it was real, it was different. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was personal. And if she failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. Are you sure about this? Mark's voice came over the radio, breaking her concentration. Positive, she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. I'm in this all the way, Mark. I can't back out now. Be careful, he urged. And remember, if anything goes wrong, get out. We'll handle it. Rachel took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She knew what she was risking, knew the stakes had never been higher. She stepped into the building, her mind focused on the task ahead. The final blow. The heist was clean, too clean. Rachel and Mark had orchestrated everything perfectly. The information was in their hands. But as she held the folder containing the files that could bring their enemies to their knees, a strange sense of emptiness washed over her. She was so close to winning, so close to taking down everything that had hurt her, but a part of her wondered if it would ever be enough. Would any of this fix what had been broken? Would taking down these people bring her peace? The sound of footsteps behind her snapped her out of her thoughts. She turned instinctively, her heart stopping when she saw who it was. Theo. He stood in the doorway, his face a mask of calm. But Rachel knew him too well. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the flicker of something darker in his eyes. "Rachel," he said, his voice low. "You didn't think I—" Rachel's eyes stung with the first light of dawn as she came to, slumped against the cold metal of an emergency stairwell. Her lungs burned, the acrid scent of smoke and sweat still heavy in her nostrils. Bits of concrete and plaster littered. The floor, marks of the struggle that had brought her here. For a moment, she didn't remember how she got there. Then the memory crashed back. Theo's mocking smile, the flash of his gun, the roar of collapsing machinery. She'd thought it was the end, her end, but something had pulled her free. Mark. She forced herself to her feet, every muscle protesting. Pulling her phone from her pocket, she found his single message. "I couldn't wait. Come to the rooftop. That's the only safe place." Every step up those stairs felt like ascending from a grave. At the top, the city sprawled below. Gray rooftops, glass towers, the river curling like a ribbon through it all. Mark stood under the weak glow of a broken floodlight, his coat dusted with ash, relief and fear warring in his eyes. "I thought I lost you," he whispered, closing the distance in 2 strides. His hand cradled her face, gentle enough to shatter any lingering fear. "But here you are." She let herself lean into him, the two of them standing on that exposed rooftop, the wind tugging at their coats. Around them, the city was waking, unaware of the wire-fueled battle that had raged just below 100. A new canvas. They sat on the edge of the roof, legs swinging over the void, as Mark pressed a small flash drive into Rachel's palm. "This is everything," he said. "All the proof we stole, all the names, even Theo's complicity. We have the leverage to finish this." Rachel understood what he was offering, a chance to end it once and for all, to broadcast the truth in one brutal burst and risk the world tearing itself apart, or to walk away, leave the flash drive here like an unfinished story. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders against the chill. "I don't want to be the villain who unleashes chaos," she said softly. "But I can't let them keep hiding behind ashes either." Mark nodded. "Then we paint something new." In the pale dawn light, they planned their final move. An anonymous release of all data to every press network, every watchdog site, every open-source repository. A coordinated leak so vast that no single power could smother it. A work of guerrilla art, truth laid bare in code and documents, splashed across the world's screens. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, picturing the cascade of revelations. CEOs toppled, politicians exposed, secret back rooms laid open to daylight. It terrified her and exhilarated her at the same time. She opened her eyes on the rising sun. "We're not perfect," she said, "but I trust us to do it right." Mark took her hand. Together. Below, the city trembled with possibility, its future an empty canvas. And for once, Rachel felt ready to pick up the brush. The story continues. The days after the leak were a blur of headlines, political firestorms, and corporate executives scrambling to cover their tracks. Rachel and Mark moved through the chaos like ghosts, never staying in one place long enough to be noticed. They didn't celebrate. There was no victory dance, no sense of accomplishment. The city had become a fractured thing, and their role in it was irrevocable. The leak had worked too well. They had thrown a stone into a lake of murky water, and the ripples were far bigger than they'd ever anticipated. Names had been exposed, well known. Figures, faces they once admired. The very people who had orchestrated the betrayals, the systems of corruption, had been unmasked. But with that unmasking came a tidal wave of backlash, and Rachel knew it wouldn't be long before those in power would be hunting them down. Theo, of course, had tried to retaliate, but Rachel had anticipated his moves, the intel they had gathered. On him, his ties to underground networks, his hidden accounts, had allowed them to stay one step ahead. Theo's wrath was a storm, but Rachel had learned how to harness the power of that storm. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't just broken the system, they had cracked something inside themselves. There was no going back from this, and the world they were living in now was one where nothing would ever feel safe again. 2. The weight of truth. Rachel spent her nights staring at the flash drive, the key to their war, now sitting in a small, metal box hidden beneath her floorboards. The weight of it had become too much to bear. She couldn't escape the constant reminder that their decision, though right in many ways, had cost them everything they had worked for. Trust was now a currency no one could afford, and the question remained, what was the cost of truth? Mark seemed lost in his own way. He worked tirelessly, moving between safe houses, ensuring the leak continued to send shockwaves throughout every industry. But when he came home, his eyes carried the same weight Rachel felt in her chest. The lines between who they were and what they had done had blurred beyond recognition. "It's not over yet, is it?" Rachel asked one evening, her voice carrying the tiredness of someone who hadn't slept in days. They were sitting at the kitchen table, papers scattered everywhere, a single light hanging above them like a soft beacon. Mark leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "No, it's only begun." They had been forced to move more often than they'd like, hiding in plain sight, checking every lock and bolt, because even with the chaos they'd caused, those in power were still hunting. What would they do if they caught them? What would happen if their enemies had learned how to fight back in ways Rachel and Mark couldn't anticipate? "It's not enough, is it?" Rachel repeated. She was thinking aloud, piecing together their fractured world. "Even if we take down Theo and the others, they'll just rebuild. They'll adapt. They'll find new ways to hide." Mark's gaze softened as he met her eyes, and for a fleeting moment she saw the man she used to know, the one who believed they could change things. "Maybe. But maybe. Maybe we give them something to think about. Something that lasts." She wasn't sure if she believed him anymore. 3. The breaking point days stretched into weeks. The pressure of their new lives grew heavier, and Rachel felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. There were nights when she felt she might crumble under the strain. They had taken on something too large, something too dangerous, and for all their preparation, they had never truly understood the consequences of what they had unleashed. One evening, after yet another close call where they had barely escaped a police raid, Rachel found herself standing alone at the edge of their temporary apartment balcony. The city stretched out before her, a massive landscape of lights, noise, and unseen dangers. She had wanted to fix the broken system, expose the lies, but now she wasn't so sure it had been worth it. In the distance, sirens wailed. The tension in her chest tightened. "Are we doing the right thing?" she whispered to herself, her breath clouding in the cool air. A voice broke through her thoughts. Mark stood behind her, his silhouette just visible against the faint glow of the lights. "You're asking that now?" She turned, trying to keep the rawness of her emotions hidden, but the vulnerability slipped through. "I'm not sure we can win this. I'm not sure there's a way out of this anymore." Mark stepped closer, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "I think we've already won." Rachel looked up at him, searching his eyes. His face was tired, older somehow, as though the years had stripped him of innocence. But there was something in his gaze, a glimmer of hope that seemed almost fragile. "We exposed them. They're out in the open now," he continued. "And maybe that's enough. Maybe we don't have to be the ones who fix it all. We're not superheroes, Rachel. We're just people who've tried to do what's right, and maybe that's all we can do." The silence stretched between them, but Rachel felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. Maybe it wasn't about destroying the entire system. Maybe it was about making a dent, about showing the world that things could change. "I don't know what comes next," she said quietly, "but I think we'll figure it out together." Mark nodded, pulling her into his arms as they both stared out at the uncertain horizon. 4. The end or the beginning? Months passed. Rachel and Mark kept moving, but the world had shifted. People had begun to question the status quo. The corporations, the governments, the people in power. They hadn't been able to bury the truth. It had taken root, spreading, slowly like a weed, making people reconsider how much they'd accepted for so long. But as the public grew more aware, the darkness in the shadows grew more dangerous. Theo, though broken and defeated, wasn't to... The city had begun to heal in strange ways. There were whispers, ripples of change in the undercurrents. Some people rallied for reform, calling for better oversight, justice for the families affected by the corporate and political scandals that had been exposed. Others, however, buried their heads in the sand, willing to turn a blind eye if it meant their comforts could remain intact. But in the shadows, things were never as simple as they seemed. Even as Rachel and Mark moved forward with their lives, trying to find a semblance of normalcy, the system that had been fractured still had the power to mend itself, using its vast networks, resources, and the people willing to serve it. Rachel stared at her reflection in the mirror as she applied a light coat of makeup. She had learned to mask the exhaustion on her face, the weariness that seemed to have etched itself into her skin. The woman staring back at her wasn't the same person who had walked into this fight with naive hopes. No, this woman had seen too much, felt the weight of too many truths, and still, the fight raged on within her. "Are we safe?" she asked aloud, though the words weren't really directed at anyone. They hung in the air, a question only half-formed but ever-present. Mark entered from the other room, his clothes unwrinkled, his demeanor sharp. He had always been good at maintaining control, but even he couldn't hide the cracks that had deepened in his expression over the past few months. "I don't know," he replied, his voice low. "There's always someone watching, always someone who wants to make sure the story doesn't end this way." Rachel took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. They had won, there was no denying that, but victories in this game were never clear. What they had done had sent tremors through the power structures that had held the city and their lives hostage for so long. Yet there was no real ending to any of it, not in this world. People had short memories, and the scars left on the powerhouses of the city were already beginning to heal. Some had fallen, but many others simply slid into the background, biding their time. "We should go," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Leave for a while, just to breathe." Mark hesitated, but the decision had already been made in Rachel's mind. They had nowhere else to go, nothing else to turn to, except each other. If they stayed in the city any longer, they would suffocate. The walls had begun to close in again, and every corner felt like another threat, another reminder of the people they had betrayed, the systems they had exposed, the shadow of their own decisions. Mark finally nodded, his jaw tight. "You're right. We've been running from the fallout for too long." 106, Departure. The car ride out of the city felt surreal, as if they were slipping through a crack in time. It was a different world outside the urban sprawl, one with open roads, forests, and wide skies. Yet Rachel couldn't escape the heavy feeling in her chest, the gnawing sense that she was running away from something she could never truly escape. Her thoughts drifted back to the people they had left behind, friends they had once trusted, allies who had become strangers after. The dust settled. Theo was a ghost now. His influence had crumbled, and with it, his power. But even his absence felt like a quiet threat that could return at any moment. "What are we really running from, Mark?" she asked quietly, turning her gaze to him. He glanced at her from the driver's seat, his expression unreadable. "I don't know," he admitted. "But maybe it's not about running from something. Maybe it's about finding something new, something better." Rachel didn't answer. She wasn't sure she believed in the idea of starting over. There was too much baggage, too many things left unsaid. But the open road stretched before them, and for now, it was enough. 7. A new chapter? They found a small town far enough from the city to remain anonymous, though it wasn't long before Rachel noticed the eyes that followed them, those who recognized the tired faces of people who had seen too much. They didn't need to ask questions to know that Rachel and Mark carried secrets. In a town like this, secrets were a currency. But it was quieter here, less pressing. And for the first time in a long while, Rachel began to feel the weight of the world, if not lifted, then at least momentarily forgotten. Mark began to work with the local community, using the skills he had developed in the corporate world to help the people here, to rebuild in a way that didn't come with strings attached. Rachel took up art again, finding solace in the quiet rhythm of painting. It wasn't the loud rebellion of the city they had left behind, but it was something they could hold on to. Still, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were living on borrowed time. They had done their part to expose the truth, but the truth, like the past, was never as simple as it seemed. In the quiet of their new life, she often wondered if there would ever be a point where they could truly let go of what they'd done. Or was this their punishment? A life lived in half-shadows, constantly looking over their shoulders. But maybe, just maybe, that was the only way to survive. Maybe peace was a lie, an illusion made by those who weren't looking closely enough. 1. Evening, as Rachel painted beneath the pale light of the setting sun, she heard Mark's footsteps behind her. He stood in the doorway, watching her with an intensity she hadn't seen in a long time. "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice quiet. "Of everything catching up with us. Of what's next." She paused, the brush still in her hand. Looking up at him, she saw the man she had fought beside, fought with, looking for something in her that he hadn't found yet. "We can't undo what we've done, Mark," Rachel said, her voice steady, though the fear in her heart echoed in every word. "But we can choose what comes next. We've always had that choice."